Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Mammoth Cave. I'm Rebecca Sullivan, and I was 37 when I learned that some family reunions should never happen. What started as an attempt to reconnect with my estranged sister became a descent into something that still makes me check the locks twice before bed. The invitation had arrived on expensive cardstock, embossed with gold lettering that caught the light like insect wings. The Sullivan Family Renewal Gathering, it read, June 15th, 18. Mammoth Cave National Park, Kentucky. Reconnect, restore, remember. At the bottom, in my sister's precise handwriting, "Please come, Becca. It's time to heal our family." I hadn't spoken to Diana in 3 years. Not since the funeral, when she'd accused me of abandoning our mother during her final illness. The accusation had been unfair, but not entirely untrue. I'd thrown myself into my work as a travel photographer, using assignments as an excuse to avoid the slow decay of watching cancer consume the woman who'd raised us alone after Dad disappeared when we were 12. But the invitation included a check for $5,000 to cover travel expenses and any inconvenience. Diana had always been wealthy. Her husband owned a chain of medical clinics, but this felt excessive for a family camping trip. Still, I'd recently gone through a brutal divorce and could use both the money and the distraction. I rented a modest Class C RV from a place in Louisville and drove the winding roads through Kentucky's horse country toward the park. The invitation had specified RV camping only, which seemed odd since our family had always been tent campers when we were kids. But Diana had changed a lot since marrying Dr. Richard Voss 5 years earlier. The campground was tucked into a hollow surrounded by dense hardwood forest. Tall oaks and maples created a green canopy that filtered the afternoon sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. I counted 14 other RVs arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit area. All of them were high-end models, Airstreams, luxury coaches, and massive motorhomes that probably cost more than my annual income. Diana was waiting for me at the designated spot, looking exactly like she had in the family photos that had stopped coming after our mother died. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer camping clothes that had never seen real dirt, and that same bright smile that had always made me feel like I was disappointing her somehow. "Becca!" She embraced me with enthusiasm that felt genuine but somehow calculated. "I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would." "The check was persuasive," I said, immediately regretting the cynical tone. "I mean, thank you. This is impressive." I gestured at the circle of RVs. Richard wanted to make sure everyone would be comfortable. You know how he is about details. Diana's smile flickered slightly. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone." That's when I realized I didn't recognize any of the other campers. I'd expected to see cousins, aunts, uncles, the extended Sullivan family I remembered from childhood gatherings. Instead, Diana introduced me to people with unfamiliar faces and surname combinations that didn't make sense. "This is Robert and Martha Sullivan Chen from Oregon," Diana said, presenting an elderly Asian couple who smiled and nodded politely. "And over there are the Sullivan Nguyens from Texas and the Sullivan Patels from Florida." I shook hands and made small talk, but confusion was growing in my stomach like a cold knot. Our family was Irish Catholic, third-generation immigrants from Boston. We were pale, freckled, and uniformly terrible at tanning. These people represented a United Nations of ethnicities, all claiming to be Sullivans. "Diana," I said quietly as we walked toward my assigned spot, "I don't understand. Who are these people? They're not our family." "Of course they are," she replied, that bright smile never wavering. "The Sullivan family is bigger than we ever imagined. Richard's genealogy research has been incredible. He's traced connections we never knew existed. Genealogy doesn't change ethnicity," I said. "That couple from Oregon, they're clearly not Irish." Diana stopped walking and turned to face me. For just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Something cold and calculating that reminded me of a snake deciding whether to strike. Family isn't just about blood, Becca. It's about choice, about accepting the bonds that matter. She placed a hand on my arm and her skin felt unnaturally warm. You'll understand better after tonight's ceremony. What ceremony? The renewal, she said. It's what we're all here for. To become the family we were always meant to be. That evening, after I'd set up my RV and tried to process the strangeness of the situation, someone knocked on my door. It was a woman about my age with dark skin and kind eyes who introduced herself as Patricia Sullivan Washington. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "You looked a little overwhelmed during introductions." "That's one way to put it," I said, inviting her in. "How long have you been part of the Sullivan family?" Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "About 6 months. My husband Marcus and I were recruited after his father passed away. Diana reached out to us, said we had connections to the family tree that we'd never known about." "Recruited? That's probably the wrong word. Invited. She invited us to join the family." Patricia sat down at my small dinette table. "The thing is, we needed the money. Marcus lost his job last year and we were about to lose our house. Diana offered to pay off our mortgage and give us a monthly stipend if we'd participate in these gatherings. That's generous." "It is. Too generous, maybe." Patricia lowered her voice. "Becca, can I ask you something? Do you remember choosing to come here?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course I do. Diana sent an invitation. But do you remember making the decision? Like sitting down and thinking it through and deciding to say yes?" I started to answer, then stopped. Now that she mentioned it, the timeline felt fuzzy. I remembered receiving the invitation. I remembered renting the RV. I remembered driving here. But the actual moment of decision, the point where I'd said, "Yes, I'll go," was strangely absent from my memory. "That's what I thought," Patricia said, seeing my expression. "None of us really remember deciding to come. We just found ourselves here." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying something's not right about this place. About Diana. About Dr. Voss." Patricia glanced toward the window as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "Have you met him yet?" I shook my head. "He's intense. Asks a lot of personal questions. Wants to know about family history, childhood memories, things that seem too intimate for someone you just met." Patricia leaned closer. "And Becca, some of the people here have been coming to these gatherings for years, but they don't look any older. Mrs. Chen told me she's been attending for 5 years, but she looks exactly the same in photos from the first gathering." A chill ran down my spine. Where are those photos? Diana keeps them in her RV, like a scrapbook of all the renewal ceremonies. Patricia stood up. "I think we should be careful tonight. Whatever this ceremony is, I don't think it's what Diana claims." After Patricia left, I tried to make sense of what she'd told me. I pulled out my phone to call a friend back home, thinking an outside perspective might help. But there was no signal, not even one bar. I checked the RV's radio. Static on every frequency. The isolation felt sudden and complete, like a trap closing around us. As darkness fell, someone started a bonfire in the central area. The flames cast dancing shadows on the circle of RVs, and gradually people emerged from their vehicles carrying folding chairs and drinks. I joined them reluctantly, sitting between Patricia and an elderly man who introduced himself as Frank Sullivan Rodriguez. "First time?" Frank asked, his voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "Yes. You?" "3rd year." He sipped from a coffee mug that smelled like something stronger than coffee. "Gets easier after the first one." "What gets easier?" Frank didn't answer. He was staring at the fire with an expression I couldn't read. Diana appeared with a man I assumed was her husband. Dr. Richard Voss was tall and thin, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He wore expensive outdoor clothing that looked like it had never been outdoors. "Family," Diana said, raising her voice to address the group. "Welcome to our quarterly renewal gathering. For those joining us for the first time, tonight is about strengthening the bonds that unite us as Sullivans. She gestured to her husband. "Richard has prepared a special presentation about our shared heritage and the importance of family loyalty." Dr. Voss stepped forward with a tablet computer. "Family," he began, his voice carrying an oddly hypnotic cadence, "is the foundation of human civilization. Blood bonds, marriage bonds, and chosen bonds all contribute to our collective strength." He touched the tablet, and suddenly the fire changed. The flames turned from orange to deep blue, then to an unsettling green that hurt to look at directly. "But traditional family structures are limited," Dr. Voss continued. "They exclude, they divide, they create artificial barriers between people who could support each other." The fire was now burning silver, casting shadows that moved independently of the flames. I tried to look away but found my gaze drawn back to the hypnotic flicker. The Sullivan family represents something new, an intentional family, a chosen family. A family bound not by accident of birth, but by mutual need and shared purpose. Around the circle, I could see the other attendees nodding in unison. Their faces were slack, expressions peaceful, but somehow vacant. Through the renewal ceremony, we strengthen these bonds. We share not just our names, but our memories, our experiences, our very essence. Dr. Voss was walking around the fire now, making eye contact with each person in turn. We become more than the sum of our parts. When his gaze met mine, I felt something cold and invasive probe at the edges of my consciousness, like fingers made of ice water reaching into my thoughts. I jerked my head away, breaking the connection. The moment I looked away from the fire, some of the hypnotic effect faded. I could think more clearly, and what I was thinking was that I needed to get away from here immediately. "Patricia," I whispered, leaning toward my neighbor. But Patricia was staring at the fire with the same vacant expression as everyone else. Dr. Voss had noticed my resistance. His pale eyes fixed on me with increased intensity. "Rebecca," he said, using my full name, though I'd only introduced myself as Becca. "You're fighting the process. This only makes it more difficult." "What process?" I stood up, backing away from the fire. "What are you doing to these people?" "We're becoming family," Diana said, but her voice sounded different now. Layered, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "Real family. Permanent family." That's when I noticed that everyone around the fire was speaking in the same voice. Not just the same words, the exact same voice, emerging from different mouths simultaneously. "Blood family disappoints," they said in perfect chorus. "Blood family abandons. Blood family dies and leaves you alone." I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear Diana's voice, or the voice that was using Diana's mouth, calling after me. "You can't leave, Becca. You're already part of us. You just haven't accepted it yet." I reached my RV and fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The engine turned over and I threw it in reverse, not caring if I hit anything in my haste to escape. But as I backed away from my parking spot, the headlights illuminated something that made me slam on the brakes. There was no road out of the campground. Where the entrance road should have been, there was only dense forest. Massive trees that definitely hadn't been there when I'd driven in that afternoon. The RV's headlights revealed bark and leaves where there should have been asphalt. I shifted into drive and tried a different direction, following what looked like it might be a trail. But everywhere I went, the forest was impenetrable. It was as if the entire campground had been transplanted into the middle of a primeval wilderness. The radio crackled to life with Diana's voice. "You can't leave until you accept the renewal, Becca. The forest won't let you." I turned off the radio and kept driving, searching desperately for any gap in the trees. But the forest seemed to shift around me, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. After an hour of futile searching, I parked the RV in a small clearing and tried to think rationally about my situation. Whatever was happening here involved some kind of mind control or hypnosis. Dr. Voss had some way of making people compliant, of making them forget their real families and accept this artificial one. But why? What did he gain from collecting random people and calling them Sullivans? I remembered what Patricia had said about the photos in Diana's RV. Maybe those would provide some answers. I waited until after midnight, when the campfire had died down and the other RVs were dark. Then I crept out of my vehicle and made my way toward Diana's massive motorhome. The door was unlocked. Inside, the RV was appointed like a luxury hotel suite, all leather and polished wood. I found the photo albums on a built-in bookshelf near the dining area. What I saw in those photos made my blood turn to ice. The albums documented renewal gatherings going back more than 10 years. Always the same circle of RVs, always the same central fire pit, always Dr. Voss presiding over the ceremony. But the people in the photos changed from gathering to gathering. In the earliest photos, the attendees looked like normal middle-aged adults. But as the albums progressed through time, the faces became younger. Not just younger looking, actually younger, as if the aging process had reversed. By the most recent photos, some of the people looked like teenagers, despite the fact that the album showed them aging backwards over a span of years. And at the center of every ceremony photo was Diana, looking exactly the same age in every picture. I flipped to the very last page and found something that nearly made me scream. It was a photo of me. Not taken tonight or yesterday, but clearly from a previous gathering. I was sitting around the same fire pit, wearing clothes I didn't recognize, smiling with the same vacant expression I'd seen on the others. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written, Rebecca Sullivan, 4th renewal, age 33. I was 37. If this photo was real, it had been taken 4 years ago, but I had no memory of ever being here before. Footsteps on the RV's stairs made me freeze. Dr. Voss appeared in the doorway, no longer bothering to look human. His pale eyes were now completely white, and his skin had taken on a translucent quality that revealed dark veins beneath. "You always fight it the first few times," he said conversationally. "The conscious mind rebels against the process, but eventually you learn to accept the gift we're offering." What gift? I backed away from him, clutching the photo album. Eternal family, eternal youth, eternal belonging. He stepped into the RV, and I could see that his movements were wrong. Too fluid, like he was floating slightly above the floor. "You've been alone your whole life, Rebecca. Your father abandoned you. Your mother died. Your marriage failed. Your sister hates you. Diana doesn't hate me. Diana died 3 years ago," Dr. Voss said calmly. "Brain aneurysm, very sudden. You didn't even know because you'd stopped talking to her." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true. Check your phone. Call anyone who knew her." "Oh, wait, you can't. Because deep down, you already know I'm telling the truth." Images flashed through my mind. Fragments of memories I'd somehow suppressed. A phone call from Richard. Tears. A funeral I'd been too proud to attend. Diana reaching out to me during our mother's illness, and me ignoring her calls because I was angry about things that didn't matter. "The thing about family," Dr. Voss continued, "is that blood ties are temporary. People age, they die, they disappoint you. But the family I create is permanent. We preserve the best version of each person before life wears them down. You're stealing people's lives. I'm improving them. Everyone here was broken when I found them. Lonely, desperate, forgotten by their real families. I give them purpose, belonging, eternal youth." His white eyes fixed on mine. "And eventually, after enough renewals, they become part of me. Their experiences, their memories, their personalities all contribute to something greater." That's when I understood. Dr. Voss wasn't just controlling these people. He was collecting them. Each renewal ceremony allowed him to absorb a little more of their essence, their life force, their individuality. Eventually, they would be completely consumed, nothing left but empty shells that he could inhabit. And I'd apparently been participating in this process for years without knowing it. "How many times?" I asked. "This will be your 5th renewal," he said. "After tonight, there won't be enough of the original Rebecca left to resist anymore. You'll finally accept your place in the family." I looked down at the photo album again. In the picture from my supposed 4th renewal, I looked young, but there was something missing from my eyes. A spark that had been there in earlier photos was simply gone. What happens to the people you consume? They become part of something beautiful. A collective consciousness that spans decades of human experience. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of love or loss, all preserved forever. That's not living. That's just storage. Dr. Voss smiled, and I could see that his teeth were too sharp, too numerous. You say that now, but you've been saying it for years, and you keep coming back. I don't remember coming back, because I only let you remember what serves the process. But somewhere deep inside, Rebecca, you know this is where you belong. You know this is the only family that will never abandon you. As he spoke, I could feel that same cold presence probing at my thoughts. Memories began to surface. Flashes of previous gatherings, of myself participating in renewal ceremonies, of gradually becoming more compliant over the years. But there was something else in those recovered memories. A plan. A preparation. Every time I'd regained consciousness enough to realize what was happening, I'd left myself clues. Hidden messages in my belongings, coded entries in my journal, even a small recording device tucked inside my camera bag. While Dr. Voss continued his hypnotic monologue, I slowly reached for my camera. Not to take a picture, but to access the voice recorder I'd hidden there during a previous escape attempt. My fingers found the device and activated the playback. My own voice, sounding tired but determined, whispered from the tiny speaker. The cave. He's weak in the cave. The real Mammoth Cave, not the campground. Iron disrupts his control. Find the iron deposits. Dr. Voss heard the recording, and his expression changed to fury. Clever, but pointless. Can't escape the forest, and you can't resist the renewal forever. Maybe not, I said, but I can try. I smashed the photo album against his face and ran for the door. Behind me, Dr. Voss made a sound like wind howling through a cemetery. I sprinted back to my RV and started the engine. If my previous self was right about iron deposits, then I needed to find the actual Mammoth Cave, not this supernatural prison disguised as a campground. The forest still blocked every obvious route, but now I was looking for something different. Geological features, rock formations, places where iron ore might be present. I drove through the woods, following animal trails and creek beds, letting the RV's undercarriage scrape against rocks and roots. Behind me, I could see lights moving through the trees. The other RVs, or what was left of their drivers, pursuing me. After what felt like hours, my headlights illuminated something that gave me hope. A limestone cliff face with the distinctive entrance to a natural cave. This was the real Mammoth Cave system, not whatever illusion Dr. Voss had created around the campground. I parked as close to the cave entrance as possible and grabbed my emergency supplies. The pursuing lights were getting closer, and I could hear Diana's voice calling my name, but with that same unnatural chorus effect. Inside the cave, my flashlight revealed the familiar limestone formations of Kentucky's karst geology. But more importantly, I could see metallic veins running through the rock, iron ore deposits that glittered in the LED beam. The moment I stepped deeper into the cave, the fog in my mind began to clear. Memories came flooding back, not just of previous renewals, but of my real life. Diana had died 3 years ago, just as Dr. Voss said, but she'd died trying to save me from him. I remembered now. The first time I'd been taken to a renewal gathering, it was because Diana had discovered what Dr. Voss was doing to his patients. He was using his medical practice to identify vulnerable people, the lonely, the desperate, the forgotten, and gradually making them dependent on him. Diana had tried to expose him, and he'd killed her for it, but not before she'd found a way to contact me, to warn me about what was coming. I'd been fighting him for 3 years, using the iron deposits in various cave systems to break free of his control long enough to gather evidence. But each time, he'd eventually recaptured me and erased my memories again. The sound of footsteps echoed from the cave entrance. Dr. Voss and his collection of absorbed souls were coming for me, but this time, I was ready. I'd found more than just iron in the cave. I'd found explosives, leftover from mining operations, carefully cached by my previous self. Enough to bring down this section of the cave system and trap Dr. Voss away from his victims. The explosives were already wired, the detonator hidden behind a limestone formation. All I had to do was press the button. "Rebecca," Dr. Voss's voice echoed off the cave walls. "You're only making this harder on yourself. And on Diana. She's in here with me, you know. Part of my collective consciousness. When you hurt me, you hurt her too." For a moment, I hesitated. What if some part of Diana really was preserved in that monster? What if destroying him meant destroying the last remnant of my sister? Then I remembered what the real Diana would want. She'd want me to be free. She'd want the other victims to be free. She'd want this thing that was wearing pieces of her soul like trophies to be stopped. I pressed the detonator. The explosion shook the entire cave system. Limestone fell like rain, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. From deeper in the cave came a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Dr. Voss's collective consciousness being torn apart. I ran for the entrance as the cave collapsed behind me. In the settling dust, I thought I heard Diana's voice one last time. Not the artificial chorus, but her real voice, saying goodbye. The forest was gone when I emerged. In its place was the normal landscape of Mammoth Cave National Park. Parking lots, visitor facilities, and a ranger station where very concerned park employees were responding to reports of an explosion. The other RVs were scattered around the area, their occupants confused and disoriented, but alive. Over the following days, as the authorities sorted out what had happened, I learned that most of the Sullivan family members had been missing persons from across the country. Some for years. They all had the same story. Answering an invitation to a family gathering they couldn't quite remember accepting, then waking up in Kentucky with gaps in their memory. I never found Diana's body. The official investigation concluded that Dr. Richard Voss had been running an elaborate con game, using hypnosis and drugs to control his victims while draining their finances. When the scheme was discovered, he'd apparently died in an accidental explosion while trying to destroy evidence. That's the official story anyway. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear Diana's voice. Not the artificial chorus from the renewal ceremonies, but her real voice from when we were kids. She tells me she's okay, that she's finally free, that I did the right thing. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly lonely, I remember Dr. Voss's offer. Eternal family, eternal belonging, never being abandoned again. The temptation is always there, to seek out another invitation, another gathering, another chance to be part of something permanent. But then I remember the price. I remember the empty eyes of the people around that silver fire, and I remember that some families aren't worth joining. Some bonds are meant to be broken. The GPS died while I was driving through the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota, leaving me with nothing but static and a screen that flickered between recalculating and complete darkness. My name is Thomas Crawford. I'm 68 years old, and what happened to me during those 4 days in September still makes me question everything I thought I knew about memory, time, and the weight of secrets we carry. I'd bought the Winnebago Micro Mini 6 months earlier, after Helen passed. 43 years of marriage, and suddenly I was alone in a house that felt too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts. The RV was supposed to be my escape, a way to see the country, visit places we'd always talked about but never made time for. The Boundary Waters had been Helen's idea. She'd read about the pristine lakes, the untouched wilderness, the canoe routes that hadn't changed since the voyagers paddled them 2 centuries ago. "When you retire," she'd said during one of her chemotherapy sessions, "when you retire, we'll rent a cabin up there and just listen to the loons." But Helen never got to hear those loons. The cancer took her 3 months before my retirement party. So here I was, alone in a 24-foot RV, following back roads through the Superior National Forest because I couldn't bear to listen to the silence in our house anymore. The GPS had been working fine until I'd crossed into the wilderness area. Then, just as the afternoon light began to slant low through the towering pines, Every piece of technology in the RV simply stopped. No GPS, no radio, no cell service. Even the dashboard clock had gone blank. I pulled over at what looked like a primitive campground, just a small clearing with a fire ring and a weathered picnic table. There was no official signage, no fee station, no indication that it was a legitimate camping spot. But the sun was setting, and I wasn't comfortable driving these narrow forest roads in the dark. As I leveled the RV and connected to my portable generator, I noticed something odd about the clearing. The grass was too green, too uniform, as if it had been recently seeded, and the fire ring looked new despite being made from stones that appeared ancient, covered in lichen and worn smooth by countless seasons. But what really caught my attention was the silence. In 40 years of camping and hiking, I'd never experienced such complete quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. I made a simple dinner and tried not to think about how Helen would have loved this spot. She'd always been better at enjoying solitude than I was. I needed noise, activity, purpose. Without those distractions, my mind tended to wander into dark places. As full darkness settled over the forest, I noticed lights moving between the trees. Not flashlights or lanterns, but something softer, more organic. Like fireflies, but too large and too steady to be insects. I stepped outside to get a better look, and that's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought other campers had arrived and set up somewhere deeper in the woods. But as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices were coming from multiple directions, and they weren't having conversations. Instead, each voice seemed to be speaking alone, recounting something in the measured cadence of storytelling. "Was 7 years old when my father brought me to this lake for the first time," one voice was saying. "He taught me to cast a line into the deep water where the base hide among the fallen logs." Another voice from a different direction. "The summer of 1943, when gas rationing meant we couldn't drive to Duluth like we usually did. Mother packed lunches and we took the train to Grand Rapids, then walked 15 miles to reach." A third voice, closer now. "Married Helen on a rainy day in October, but she said the rain was good luck because it meant the earth was blessing our union." My blood turned to ice. The third voice was talking about Helen, about my Helen, but it wasn't my voice telling the story. I grabbed a flashlight from the RV and headed toward the sound, pushing through underbrush that seemed to close in behind me like a living thing. The voice continued, describing details of our wedding that I'd never told anyone. Helen's grandmother's pearl necklace, the way she'd laughed when I'd stumbled over my vows, the taste of her mother's chocolate cake. The voice was coming from a man sitting alone beside a small campfire. He looked to be about my age, with gray hair and the weathered hands of someone who'd worked outdoors most of his life. He was staring into the flames as he spoke, seemingly unaware of my presence. "Excuse me," I called out. The man didn't respond. He continued speaking in that same measured cadence. "Honeymoon at a cabin on Lake Superior. Helen had never seen the Great Lake before, and she stood on the shore for an hour just watching the waves." "Hey," I said louder, stepping into the circle of firelight. "How do you know about my wife?" The man finally looked up, and I saw that his eyes were completely white. Not cloudy with cataracts, but actually white, as if the irises and pupils had been erased. "Thomas," he said in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I'm the keeper of your story," the man said, "just as they are the keepers of theirs." He gestured toward the darkness, where I could now see dozens of other small fires scattered through the forest. Each fire had a single person sitting beside it, each person speaking their story into the night. "What is this place?" "A repository," the man said. "A place where memories come to be preserved when their original owners no longer need them." "That's impossible." The man smiled, and it was my smile. The same crooked grin Helen had teased me about for 43 years. "Is it? You've been forgetting things lately, haven't you, Thomas? Little things at first. Where you put your keys, what you had for breakfast. The name of your first-grade teacher. He was right. Since Helen's death, I'd been experiencing what I'd attributed to grief-related memory problems. Nothing serious, just the normal fog that comes with major loss and stress. It's not grief, Thomas, the man continued as if reading my thoughts. It's the natural process. As we age, as we prepare to let go, our memories begin to migrate here, to be preserved for those who come after. You're insane. Am I? Then explain how I know that Helen used to hum Moon River while she did the dishes. Explain how I know about the scar on your left knee from when you fell off your bike at age 9. Explain how I know that you've been carrying a secret for 57 years. A secret you've never told anyone. Not even Helen. My mouth went dry. There was only one secret that fit that description, and it was something I'd sworn to take to my grave. The summer you turned 11, the man said, now speaking in my exact voice. You were staying at your uncle's farm in Wisconsin. Your cousin Danny was visiting too. Danny, who was 2 years older and always mean to you. Stop. You were playing by the old well behind the barn. Danny was teasing you, pushing you, saying you were too scared to look down into the dark water. He leaned over the edge to show you how brave he was. Stop it. And you pushed him. The words hung in the air like smoke from the campfire. I hadn't thought about that day in decades, but now it came flooding back with crystal clarity. Danny's surprised face as he lost his balance. The splash from far below. The long minutes of waiting for him to surface, then the longer minutes of accepting that he wouldn't. I'd run back to the farmhouse and told the adults that Danny had fallen while we were playing. It was almost true. The difference between an accident and murder was a single moment, a single choice, a single push. They never found his body, the man continued. The well was too deep, connected to underground streams that carried him away. Your aunt and uncle searched for days. The police investigated. But you were just a child, and children don't lie about things like that. How? I whispered. How could you possibly know? Because that memory is already here, the man said. It's been weighing on you so heavily that it started to separate from you years ago. Guilt is one of the strongest forces for memory displacement. I looked around at the other fires, the other people speaking their stories into the darkness. Are they all remembering secrets? Confessing sins? Some of them. Others are simply reaching the end of their natural lifespan and releasing memories to make room for whatever comes next. The man stood up, and I could see that he moved exactly like me. The slight favoring of my left hip, the way I unconsciously rubbed my arthritic hands together. The question is, Thomas, are you ready to let go? Let go of what? The guilt, the pain, the weight of carrying that secret alone. He gestured toward the fire. Sit with me. Tell the story properly. Let it become part of the repository instead of a poison in your soul. And then what? Then you'll be free to remember the good things. The 43 years with Helen. The joy instead of the guilt. The love instead of the fear. I wanted to run. Every instinct told me to get back to the RV and drive away as fast as possible. But something about the man's offer was compelling. For 57 years, I'd carried the weight of what I'd done to Danny. It had shaped every relationship, every decision, every moment of happiness I'd tried to claim. What if I could let it go? I sat down beside the fire. Tell me about that day, the man said gently. And I did. I told him about Uncle Frank's farm, about the well, about Danny's cruelty and my moment of rage. I told him about the years of nightmares, the way I'd avoided deep water, the guilt that had made me treat Helen like she was too good for me. As I spoke, I felt something loosening in my chest. A knot that had been there so long I'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of me. The man listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, feeding small branches to the fire. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he said finally. That story will be preserved here, where it can't hurt you anymore. What happens now? Now you choose. You can return to your RV and drive home, carrying only the memories that serve you. Or you can stay here and become a keeper yourself, helping others release their burdens. Stay here forever? Time works differently in the repository. A night here might be a year in the outside world, or it might be a minute. But yes, if you stay, you become part of the preservation process. I thought about my empty house, the silence that waited for me there. I thought about growing old alone, forgetting Helen's face piece by piece as my mind deteriorated. If I stay, will I remember her? Will I remember Helen? You'll remember everything worth remembering, the man said. The love, the laughter, the way she made you feel like the best version of yourself. The guilt and pain will be stored safely away, but the joy will remain. And if I leave, the guilt is gone either way. You've released it to the repository. But if you leave, you'll be alone with your memories. And eventually, time will take those too. I stared into the fire, watching the flames dance with hypnotic rhythm. Around us, the other keepers continued their endless recitation of preserved stories. "Can I see her?" I asked. "If I stay, can I see Helen again?" The man smiled. My smile, but warmer somehow. "She's been waiting for you." He pointed toward a fire deeper in the forest where I could just make out a figure in the golden light. Even from this distance, I recognized the way she sat, the tilt of her head, the graceful movement of her hands. I stood up, my decision made. But as I took a step toward Helen's fire, the man caught my arm. "Thomas, there's something you need to understand. The repository doesn't just preserve memories. It preserves the people those memories came from. But they're not exactly alive in the way you understand it." "What do you mean?" "Helen here is built from every memory of her that's ever been deposited in the repository. Yours, her family's, her friends. She's real, but she's also a composite. The perfect version of herself, freed from pain and fear and all the small disappointments of life." "That sounds wonderful." "It is, but it's not the Helen you knew. It's the Helen you all remembered her to be." I hesitated. "Are you saying she's not real?" "I'm saying she's more real than real. But if you stay here with her, you'll eventually become the same thing. A perfect version of yourself, freed from everything that made you human." I looked toward Helen's fire again. She'd seen me now and was standing, raising her hand in the same wave she'd given me every morning for 43 years. "Is that so bad?" I asked. "To become the best version of yourself?" "That's for you to decide." I walked through the forest toward Helen's fire, past dozens of other keepers telling their stories. Some were recounting joyful memories, first loves, wedding days, the birth of children. Others were releasing darker burdens, mistakes, betrayals, moments of cowardice or cruelty. All of it was being preserved, cataloged, stored away in this impossible repository hidden in the Minnesota wilderness. Helen looked exactly as she had on our wedding day. Young, radiant, untouched by the cancer that would eventually claim her. But her eyes held the wisdom of all the years we'd shared. "Tommy," she said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "I've been waiting for you." "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, sweetheart," she replied, pulling me into an embrace that felt exactly like coming home. "You did save me. Every day we had together, every moment of love. It's all here. It's all preserved. It's all real. But you're not really Helen." "I'm every Helen you ever loved," she said. "I'm the Helen who laughed at your terrible jokes, who held you when you had nightmares, who forgave you for things you never even told me about. You know about Danny? I know about everything now. And I love you anyway. I love you because of it, not despite it. Your capacity for guilt means you have a capacity for love." We sat by her fire, and she told me stories I'd forgotten. Small moments from our life together that had seemed insignificant at the time, but had been precious enough to preserve here in the repository. As dawn broke through the trees, I realized I had to make my choice. Stay here with this perfect version of Helen, or return to the world where she was gone forever. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her. "I think you should choose what feels right," she said. "But Tommy, if you stay, you need to understand what you're giving up. The chance to make new memories, the chance to honor our love by continuing to live. I don't know how to live without you." "Yes, you do. You've been doing it for 6 months." She smiled, and it was the same smile that had convinced me to marry her 44 years ago. "You bought an RV. You came here to see the place I wanted to visit. You're already living without me." "But I'm so lonely." "Then find someone else to share your stories with. Not to replace me, but to continue the work of being human." As the morning light grew stronger, the fires began to dim. The other keepers faded like mist, their voices becoming whispers, then silence. "I have to go, don't I said. "You have to choose," Helen replied. "But whatever you choose, know that I love you. The real me loved you, and this version of me loves you. And somewhere in between those two truths is everything that matters." I kissed her goodbye, a kiss that tasted like 43 years of mornings, like every goodbye we'd ever shared, like every hello we'd never have again. Then I walked back through the forest to my RV. The GPS was working again when I started the engine. The radio crackled to life with a country music station from Duluth. My phone showed full bars and 17 missed calls from my daughter, who'd been worried when I didn't check in. I called her back and told her I was fine, that I'd just been out of range for a while, which was true, though not in the way she'd understand. As I drove away from the clearing, I tried to look back, but there was nothing there. Just forest and shadows and the kind of deep quiet that comes before the world wakes up. I don't know if the repository was real or if I'd had some kind of breakdown brought on by grief and guilt, but I know that something had changed. The weight I'd carried since that summer day when I was 11 was gone, and with it, the fear that had kept me from fully embracing the love Helen had offered. I drove home to our house, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of 43 years of good memories, and for the first time since Helen's death, that seemed like enough. 3 months later, I met Margaret at a grief support group. She was 72, recently widowed, and had the kind of laugh that reminded me why it was worth the risk of loving someone. We've been together for 2 years now, traveling in the RV to places Helen and I never got to see. Margaret understands that she's not replacing Helen, just as I understand that I'm not replacing her late husband, Frank. We're both carrying forward the love we learned from our first marriages, adding new chapters to stories that death couldn't end. But sometimes, late at night when we're camped in some remote wilderness, I hear voices in the darkness. People telling their stories, releasing their burdens, preserving their most precious memories. And sometimes I catch a glimpse of firelight through the trees, and I know the repository is still there, still doing its patient work of collecting what's too important to lose. I don't go looking for it anymore. I have enough memories to last whatever time I have left, and I'm finally ready to make new ones. But it's comforting to know that somewhere in the vast wilderness of human experience, everything that truly matters is being kept safe. Even the parts we're ready to let go of, especially those. They warned us. Locals always do, but we laughed. My name's Emma Rodriguez. I just turned 29 when we arrived at the Selway Wilderness in Idaho, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The warning came from a grizzled man at the gas station in Kuskia, the last real town before the Forest Service roads wind up into the Bitterroot Mountains. Jake was inside paying for gas and buying energy drinks while I stretched my legs next to our rented Winnebago. We'd been driving for 12 hours straight from Portland, and my back was killing me from the passenger seat. "You folks heading up into the Selway?" the old man asked. He was leaning against a rusted pickup truck wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. "That's the plan," I said, trying to be polite despite his overpowering smell of tobacco and something else I couldn't identify. "My boyfriend's doing some documentary research on the area." Documentary about what?" "Missing persons cases. There have been a lot of unexplained disappearances in that wilderness over the past 50 years. The man's expression changed. The casual curiosity disappeared, replaced by something that looked like fear. "You want some advice, miss? Turn around. Go back to Portland. Find a different story to tell." "Excuse me? That wilderness ain't right. Hasn't been right since the government started their experiments up there in the 50s. Things got loose. Things that watch. Things that take people." I was about to ask what he meant when Jake emerged from the gas station, arms full of snacks and a satisfied grin on his face. "Ready to go, Em. The guy inside says the road's in good shape all the way to the trailhead." He noticed the old man and nodded politely. "Afternoon." The man looked at Jake for a long moment, then back at me. "Remember what I said. Some stories ain't worth telling." He climbed into his pickup and drove away without another word. "What was that about?" Jake asked as we got back into the RV. "Just a weird local, trying to scare us with stories about government experiments." Jake laughed. "Perfect. Maybe we can interview him on the way back. Nothing sells documentaries like conspiracy theories." That should have been my first clue about Jake's priorities. He wasn't really interested in finding answers about the missing people. He was interested in finding a story that would make his career. At 26, he was already a successful freelance journalist, but he wanted to break into television. A documentary about mysterious disappearances in a remote wilderness could be his ticket to the big leagues. The drive up into the Selway took 3 hours on increasingly narrow and winding roads. The forest was dense and dark, even in the afternoon sunlight. Massive cedar and fir trees created a canopy so thick that it felt like driving through a green tunnel. We passed several USFS campgrounds, but Jake insisted on going deeper. "The real story is in the backcountry," he said, "where the search and rescue teams gave up looking." Finally, just before sunset, we reached what appeared to be an abandoned campground. There were sites with old fire rings and weathered picnic tables, but no signs, no fee stations, no indication that it was officially maintained. The access road was barely wide enough for the RV, and several large boulders blocked the way further into the forest. "This is perfect," Jake said, maneuvering the Winnebago into a site that overlooked a steep ravine. Remote, atmospheric, and probably right in the middle of the disappearance zone. I had my doubts, but I was tired of arguing. We'd been together for 8 months, and lately, every conversation seemed to turn into a debate about his work priorities versus our relationship. As we set up camp, I noticed something odd about the trees surrounding our site. Many of them had strange markings carved into the bark. Not the usual initials and hearts left by teenage campers, but geometric patterns that looked almost like symbols or a written language. "Jake, look at this," I called, running my fingers over a series of intersecting lines cut deep into a massive cedar. He came over with his camera already filming. "Interesting. Could be Native American, or maybe left by early settlers. This definitely goes in the documentary, or it could be some kind of warning. You're letting that old guy get to you. These are probably just territorial markers or trailblazes." But as the sun set and full darkness settled over the forest, I began to think the markings might be something else entirely. The first sign that we weren't alone came around 10 p.m. I was inside the RV, editing some of the footage Jake had shot during the drive, when I heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof. "Jake," I called. He was outside, setting up motion-activated cameras around our campsite. "Are you on the roof?" "No, why?" The footsteps continued. A slow, deliberate walking pattern from front to back, then silence. Something just walked across the roof. Jake came inside, grabbing a flashlight, probably a branch falling from one of the trees. The wind's picking up, but there was no wind. The night was completely still. Jake climbed up on the RV's ladder to check the roof. After a few minutes, he called down. "Nothing up here, but Em, you need to see this." I joined him on top of the RV and immediately understood his excitement. In the surrounding trees, dozens of pairs of eyes were reflecting his flashlight beam. They were positioned at various heights, some low to the ground, others 10 or 15 feet up in the branches. "Wildlife," Jake said, his voice full of satisfaction. "This is going to make incredible footage." But I was counting the pairs of eyes, and something was wrong. There were too many of them, and they were too evenly distributed. It looked less like random animals and more like a coordinated surveillance network. "Jake, those aren't animals." "What else would they be?" "I don't know. But animals don't position themselves like that. And they don't just watch." The eyes were completely motionless. No blinking, no movement, just steady observation from the darkness. Jake started filming with his handheld camera. "This is incredible. We're being watched by some kind of pack or family group." Maybe wolves or bears don't climb trees like that, and wolves don't have eyes that big. As if responding to my comment, the eyes began to move. Not randomly, but in a synchronized pattern, like dancers following choreography. They shifted position in the trees, maintaining the same spacing, the same watching formation. "We should go inside," I said. "Are you kidding? This is exactly what we came here for." But I was already climbing down the ladder. The synchronized movement of those watching eyes triggered every primitive survival instinct I had. Inside the RV, I locked the door and closed all the curtains. Jake stayed outside for another hour, filming and taking photos. When he finally came in, he was practically vibrating with excitement. "Em, this is it. This is the story that's going to change everything. Whatever's out there, it's intelligent, it's organized, and it's been watching people in this forest for decades. What if it's dangerous? What if it's not? What if it's just a species that hasn't been documented yet? Think about the implications. A previously unknown primate species living in the most remote wilderness in Idaho. Those weren't primates, Jake. How can you be sure? Because primates don't have eyes that glow like that, and they don't move in perfect formation." Jake was already transferring his footage to his laptop. "Look at this," he said, showing me the screen. "You can see at least 30 distinct pairs of eyes. The spacing suggests a sophisticated social structure." I looked at the footage, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The eyes weren't just watching us randomly. They were tracking our movements with the precision of security cameras. When Jake moved to the left, the eyes on that side of the forest shifted to maintain visual contact. When he returned to the center of the clearing, they readjusted accordingly. "They're hunting us," I said, "or studying us. There's a difference." Is there? That night, neither of us slept well. The RV was surrounded by sounds, footsteps, scratching noises, and occasionally what sounded like whispered conversations in a language I didn't recognize. Around 3 a.m., I woke to complete silence. After hours of constant noise, the sudden quiet was even more unsettling. I looked out the window and saw that the eyes were gone. The forest appeared empty. "Jake," I whispered, "Jake, wake up." "What? They're gone. Whatever was watching us, it's gone." Jake sat up and looked out the window. Maybe they found something more interesting to observe. Or maybe they're done observing. That's when we heard the screaming. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the forest, echoing off the ravine walls and carrying through the trees like a siren. A human scream, high and terrified and full of agony. Jake was out of bed and grabbing his camera before I could stop him. "We have to help them," he said. "We have to get out of here," I replied. "Em, someone's in trouble. We can't just ignore it. What if it's a trap? What if whatever's out there is using human sounds to lure us away from the RV?" Jake paused, considering this. Then the screaming came again, closer this time and more desperate. "I'm going," he said. "Stay here if you want, but I'm not leaving someone to die." He grabbed a flashlight and his camera and headed for the door. Against my better judgment, I followed him. The forest at night was a completely different world. Our flashlight beams seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, creating only small pools of visibility that made everything beyond them seem even more threatening. The screaming had stopped, but we could hear something moving through the underbrush ahead of us. Something large, crashing through branches and disturbing fallen leaves. "This way," Jake whispered, following the sounds. We pushed through dense undergrowth for about 10 minutes before reaching a small clearing. In the center, illuminated by our flashlights, was a backpack and camping gear scattered across the ground. No person, no signs of struggle, just abandoned equipment. Jake immediately started filming. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," he said. "Or was taken." I examined the backpack while Jake documented the scene. Inside, I found a driver's license belonging to someone named David Chen, age 24, from Seattle. There were also trail maps, energy bars, and a journal with entries dating back several days. "Jake, listen to this," I said, reading from the journal. "Day 3. The eyes are back. They watch all night but disappear before dawn. I think they're learning my routine. Keep reading. Day 4. Found tracks around my tent this morning. human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow. And there were more than a dozen different sets. Day 5. They're not trying to hide anymore. I can see them moving between the trees during the day. They look almost human from a distance, but when they get closer, the entry ended there. When they get closer, what? Jake asked. I flipped to the last entry, dated yesterday. Day 6. They took my food last night. Didn't break into anything, didn't tear open packages. They opened everything carefully and took exactly half of each item, like they're studying portion control. I think they're preparing for something. A branch snapped behind us and we spun around to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. In the beam of our flashlights, it looked almost human. Tall, thin, wearing what appeared to be dark clothing. But something about its proportions was wrong. The arms were too long, the torso too narrow, the head slightly too large for the body. "David," Jake called. "David Chen?" The figure didn't respond. It stood completely motionless, watching us with the same steady gaze we'd seen in the trees around our campsite. Jake started walking toward it, camera rolling. "We're here to help," he called. "Are you injured?" The figure turned and walked away into the forest, moving with an odd, gliding gait that looked wrong for human anatomy. "Jake, don't follow it." But he was already pushing through the underbrush, chasing after the figure with his camera. I had no choice but to follow. The pursuit led us deeper into the forest, down a steep slope and across a stream that wasn't on any of our maps. The figure stayed just ahead of us, always visible but never allowing us to get close enough for a clear look. After 20 minutes of hiking, we emerged into another clearing, this one much larger than the first. And what we saw there made us both stop in our tracks. It was a camp of sorts, but not like any camp I'd ever seen. Dozens of lean-to shelters were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, each one constructed from local materials but with a precision that suggested advanced engineering knowledge. Solar panels were mounted on some of the structures, and I could see electronic equipment that looked far too sophisticated for a wilderness camp. "What the hell is this?" Jake whispered. "A research station," I said. The old man at the gas station was right about government experiments. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a government facility. The equipment was too varied, too improvised. It looked more like a settlement that had been built up over many years by people who understood technology but had been making do with whatever they could find or steal. The figure we'd been following was nowhere to be seen, but we weren't alone. Other figures moved between the shelters, dozens of them, all with that same wrong-looking anatomy. They were watching us, but not approaching. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Are you insane? This is the story of the century. Some kind of isolated community living in the wilderness, possibly for decades. We have to document this." Jake started filming everything. The shelters, the equipment, the watching figures. But I was focused on something else. Scattered around the camp were personal belongings that clearly didn't belong to the inhabitants. Backpacks, tents, clothing, cameras. All of it looked like it had been taken from hikers and campers. "Jake, these are trophies from people who disappeared. Or equipment they found abandoned. Maybe they're like wilderness scavengers." But then I saw something that made my stomach turn. Hanging from a line between two trees were driver's licenses, dozens of them, strung up like prayer flags. David Chen's was among them, along with many others. "They're not scavengers," I said. "They're collectors. They collect people." That's when the figures began to move toward us. They came from all directions, surrounding us with the same coordinated precision we'd seen in the tree watching the night before. Up close, I could see that they were definitely humanoid, but not human. Their skin had a grayish pallor. Their eyes were larger than normal, and their movements had that same unsettling, gliding quality. "We mean no harm," Jake said, still filming. "We're researchers, like you. We want to understand." One of the figures stepped closer, and when it spoke, its voice was a perfect imitation of Jake's voice. "We want to understand." Another one spoke in my voice. "They're collectors. They collect people." A third one used David Chen's voice. "I think they're preparing for something. They were mimicking our words, our voices, our inflections with perfect accuracy. "How are they doing that?" Jake whispered. "The same way they've been watching us," I said. "They study people. They learn to imitate them." The figures began to speak in unison, using a mixture of voices. Some we recognized as our own, others that must have belonged to previous visitors to the forest. "We are the Watchers," they said. "We have been here since the Skyfire brought us. We study, we learn, we preserve." "Preserve what?" Jake asked. "Human behaviors, human voices, human memories." The answer came in a chorus of different voices, all speaking the same words. "The ones who come to our forest become part of our collection." What happened to the people those voices belong to? They are preserved. Their patterns live in us. Their knowledge becomes our knowledge. I understood now. These things weren't just collecting personal belongings. They were collecting the people themselves, somehow absorbing their voices, their memories, their personalities. "David Chen," I said. "Where is he?" "David Chen is here," one of the figures replied in David's voice. "David Chen is us. David Chen is preserved." The figure that spoke stepped forward, and I could see that it was wearing David's clothes, but underneath the familiar clothing was something that was definitely not human. "We must go," I said to Jake. "Now." But the figures had closed the circle around us. They stood there watching, studying, learning our reactions to fear. "You will join the collection," they said in unison. "Your patterns will be preserved. Your voices will live in us." "Like hell," Jake said, and for the first time since we'd arrived, he put down his camera and started looking for a way out. The circle of figures was tight, but they weren't touching us or trying to physically restrain us. They seemed content to watch and wait, as if they knew we couldn't escape. That's when I remembered something from David Chen's journal. They had taken exactly half of his food, carefully studying portion control. They were methodical, patient, scientific in their approach. "They're not trying to catch us," I whispered to Jake. "They're studying how we react to being trapped." "What does that mean?" "It means they're still in observation mode. If we can give them something more interesting to study, maybe they'll let us go." I pulled out my phone and activated the camera flash, taking rapid-fire photos of the camp and the surrounding figures. The sudden bright lights caused them to step back, their oversized eyes apparently sensitive to the illumination. "The camera flashes," I said. "They don't like bright lights." Jake immediately started using his camera's built-in flash, taking photos and videos while the bright strobes forced the figures to retreat. We ran for the gap in the circle, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over fallen logs in our haste to escape. Behind us, I could hear the figures calling after us in our own voices. "Emma! Wait!" in my voice. "This is incredible footage," in Jake's voice. "We want to understand," in David Chen's voice. We ran through the forest for what felt like hours, following the stream back toward our campsite. Several times we saw eyes watching us from the trees, but they kept their distance as long as we kept our camera flashes ready. When we finally reached our RV, we threw our gear inside and got on the road immediately. I drove while Jake tried to process what we'd experienced. "Em, do you realize what this means? We've documented a completely unknown species. This is going to revolutionize anthropology, biology, maybe even our understanding of human evolution. Jake, those things collect people. They're not some undiscovered primate species. They're predators. But think about the scientific implications. They're clearly intelligent, maybe more intelligent than humans in some ways. The way they organize their surveillance, their ability to perfectly mimic human voices. Their collection of human driver's licenses," I added pointedly. Jake was quiet for a moment. "Okay, yes, they're dangerous, but that doesn't mean we should ignore the discovery. We need to contact the authorities, organize a proper research expedition with security protocols. We need to warn people to stay away from that area. We need to do both." We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached civilization. At the first motel we found, Jake started uploading his footage to cloud storage and making calls to colleagues in the scientific community. But when he tried to show people the videos, something was wrong. The footage was corrupted. Not technically, but visually. What should have shown the watchers instead showed only empty forest and shadows. The eyes that had been so clearly visible to us appeared as nothing more than reflections or camera artifacts. "This is impossible," Jake said, reviewing the footage for the 100th time. "I know what we saw. I know what I filmed. Maybe they have some way of affecting electronic equipment," I suggested, "like the way our GPS and radio stopped working when we first entered the forest. Or maybe they understand technology better than we think. Maybe they can manipulate digital recordings the same way they manipulate voices." Jake's contacts in the scientific community were polite but skeptical. Without clear evidence, they weren't willing to mount an expedition based on our testimony alone. "We need to go back," Jake said after a week of failed attempts to convince anyone to take us seriously. "We need better equipment, better preparation, and we need to get footage they can't corrupt." "Absolutely not. This is bigger than us. This could be the most important discovery in human history. Jake, those things collect people. David Chen is gone. The driver's licenses we saw represent dozens of missing persons. And you want to go back? I want to save lives. If we can document what's really happening in that forest, we can prevent future disappearances." But I knew Jake well enough to recognize when he was lying to himself. He didn't want to save lives. He wanted to save his career. The corrupted footage had made him look like just another Bigfoot hoaxer, and his reputation in the journalism community was suffering. We broke up 2 weeks later, not because of what we'd seen in the forest, but because of how differently we'd interpreted it. Jake saw a story to be told. I saw a nightmare to be escaped. I never went back to the Selway wilderness, but Jake did. 3 months after our breakup, I got a call from the Idaho State Police. Jake's RV had been found abandoned at the same campsite where we'd stayed. His equipment was gone, but they'd found his driver's license hanging from a tree branch, along with what appeared to be a warning note written in his handwriting. They learn faster now. They know about cameras. Don't come looking. Search and rescue teams combed the area for weeks but found no trace of Jake or any other missing persons. The official report concluded that he'd likely become lost while hiking alone and succumbed to exposure, but I knew better. 6 months later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard Jake's voice on the other end of the line. "Em, is that you?" "Jake? Oh my God, where are you? Everyone thinks you're dead. I'm preserved," the voice said. "My patterns live in us. My knowledge becomes our knowledge." The line went dead. I changed my phone number the next day, but it didn't matter. They call sometimes, using Jake's voice, using David Chen's voice, using voices I don't recognize but that sound terrifyingly human. They want me to come back. They want to complete their collection. "We are still watching," they say. "We are still learning. Emma Rodriguez will join us. Emma Rodriguez will be preserved." I moved to Florida, as far from Idaho as I could get. I work in an office building in downtown Miami, surrounded by concrete and crowds and the comfortable noise of civilization. But sometimes, late at night, I see eyes watching me from the darkness between streetlights. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear my own voice calling to me from empty rooms. They followed me home from the Selway wilderness, and I think they're still learning. The RV's engine died with a shuddering gasp just as the sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm 34 years old, and what happened to us in that godforsaken stretch of Arizona desert still makes my hands shake when I write about it. "What's wrong?" Jake asked from the passenger seat, his wedding ring catching the last rays of sunlight streaming through the windshield. We'd been married 6 months, and this cross-country RV trip was supposed to be our belated honeymoon. "I don't know," I muttered, trying the ignition again. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then died completely. "Battery, maybe?" Outside, the Chiricahua Mountains loomed like broken teeth against the darkening sky. We'd taken this detour off I-10 because Jake had read about some scenic overlooks, but the narrow road had been winding through increasingly remote terrain for the past hour. No cell service. No other vehicles. just endless desert scrub and the skeletal arms of saguaro cacti reaching toward the heavens like the damned begging for mercy. There, Jake pointed through the windshield. About a quarter-mile ahead, I could make out what looked like a small settlement. A few buildings clustered around what might have been a gas station. Hand-painted signs were barely visible in the growing dusk. "We can get help there." I grabbed my phone, hoping for even one bar of service. Nothing. Guess we're walking. We locked up the RV, a 30-foot Winnebago that had cost us our savings but felt like home on wheels, and started down the cracked asphalt road. The desert air was still warm from the day's heat, but I could feel the temperature beginning to drop. By midnight, it would be near freezing. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the silence. No insects chirping, no owls hooting. Even the ever-present desert wind had stilled to an unnatural calm. The only sound was our breathing and the soft scrape of our shoes on the road. As we got closer, I could make out more details of the settlement. The gas station's neon sign flickered intermittently, casting sickly pink light over two rusted pumps. A hand-painted sign read, "Devil's Highway Trading Post, last gas for 50 miles. Behind it stood a small diner with dark windows and what looked like a motel with 6 or 7 rooms. "Charming," Jake muttered, but I caught the nervous edge in his voice. A bell jingled as we pushed through the trading post's screen door. The interior was cramped and cluttered. Shelves lined with dusty canned goods, automotive supplies, and the usual tourist trap souvenirs. But everything felt wrong somehow. The cans had no expiration dates visible. The postcards showed scenes I didn't recognize, and the writing on them seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with skin like leather and eyes the color of winter sky. He didn't look up from the magazine he was reading until we were standing right in front of him. "Help you folks?" His voice was gravelly, like he'd been breathing desert dust for decades. "Our RV broke down about a quarter-mile back," Jake explained. "We need to call a mechanic, maybe find a place to stay tonight." The old man, his name tag read Earl, finally looked up. His gaze lingered on my face longer than was comfortable, then shifted to Jake with what might have been amusement. "Mechanic won't be out till Monday," he said. "Phone's been out since the storm last week, but we got rooms." He gestured toward a screen door at the back of the store. "Diner's closed, but there's vending machines." "What day is it?" I asked, suddenly confused. "Friday," Earl replied, but something in his tone made me doubt him. Jake squeezed my hand. "We'll take a room." Earl slid a registration card across the counter along with an old-fashioned key attached to a plastic diamond with the number 3 stamped on it. $40. Cash only. I filled out the card while Jake paid, but when I tried to write the date, my pen wouldn't work. I tried again, pressing harder. Nothing. Earl watched me struggle for a moment, then slid another pen across the counter. This one worked, but the ink seemed darker than it should be, almost reddish in the fluorescent light. "Rooms around back," Earl said. "Checkout's at 11. As we turned to leave, he called after us. "Wouldn't wander around too much after dark if I were you. Things get confused out here at night." The motel room was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this. Wood paneling, shag carpet that had seen better decades, and the persistent smell of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. But it was clean enough and the beds looked comfortable. "This is like something out of a horror movie," Jake said as he tested the lock on the door. It was an old deadbolt that took some effort to turn. "Don't even joke about that." I pulled the curtains closed, not wanting to look out at the empty desert. "Let's just get some sleep. In the morning, we'll figure out how to get the RV fixed." But sleep didn't come easily. The room was too quiet, and the silence felt heavy, oppressive. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something. A footstep on gravel, a door closing, whispers I couldn't quite make out. When I'd jolt awake and listen intently, there would be nothing. Around midnight, Jake sat up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" I had. It sounded like someone knocking on doors, working their way down the row of motel rooms. Knock, knock, knock on room 1. A pause. Knock, knock, knock on room 2. Another pause. We were in room 3. Jake got up and went to the window, carefully parting the curtains to peer out. I don't see anyone. Knock, knock, knock. Our door shuddered slightly with the impact. We both froze. Maybe it's another guest, I whispered, though I knew how stupid that sounded. We hadn't seen any other cars. Jake approached the door and called out, "Who is it?" Silence. Then, in a voice that sounded almost like Jake's, but not quite, "Let me in." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Jake backed away from the door, his face pale in the dim light from the bedside lamp. That didn't sound right," he whispered. The knocking resumed, but now it wasn't rhythmic. It was frantic, desperate. The door shook with each impact, and I could hear wood splintering around the frame. "The bathroom," Jake hissed. "No windows." We grabbed our shoes and jackets and locked ourselves in the tiny bathroom. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, abruptly, it stopped. We waited until dawn to emerge. The next morning, Earl was nowhere to be found. The trading post was locked up tight, and there was no answer when we pounded on the door. More concerning, when we walked back to check on our RV, it wasn't where we'd left it. "This is impossible," Jake said, standing in the exact spot where our home on wheels should have been. There weren't even tire tracks in the dirt. It was right here. I turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The road stretched away in both directions, empty and shimmering in the morning heat. The mountains looked different somehow. More jagged, more threatening. And in the distance I could swear I saw dust clouds moving, as if something large was traveling parallel to the road but staying just out of sight. "We need to get out of here," I said. "We'll walk back to the interstate." But when we started walking in the direction we'd come from the night before, the road seemed to stretch on forever. The sun climbed higher, beating down on us mercilessly. We'd brought water bottles from the motel room, but they were small and wouldn't last long in this heat. After what felt like hours, we crested a small hill and saw the settlement spread out below us again. "That's not possible," Jake said. "We've been walking away from it." I pulled out my phone. Still no signal, but the GPS was working. According to the display, we were exactly where we'd started. We'd walked in a perfect circle somehow, even though the road had been straight. "The compass," Jake said, pulling out a small compass he kept on his keychain. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Something's wrong with this place. We decided to try a different approach, walking directly into the desert, away from the road entirely. But after an hour of hiking through thorny scrub and loose sand, we found ourselves back at the settlement again. It was as if the desert itself was folding around us, leading us back no matter which direction we chose. The sun was reaching its zenith when we stumbled back into the trading post, desperate for water and shade. Earl was behind the counter again, reading the same magazine as if nothing had happened. "Back so soon?" he asked without looking up. "Where's our RV?" Jake demanded. "What RV?" "The Winnebago we drove here in. It was parked right out there." Jake pointed toward the road. Earl finally looked up, his winter sky eyes completely blank. "Don't recall seeing any RV. You folks walked in last night, asked for a room." That's impossible." I felt like I was losing my mind. "We drove here. The engine died." "Memory plays tricks sometimes," Earl said. "Desert heat, isolation, makes people see things that aren't there, forget things that are." He sold us more water and some stale sandwiches from a cooler. The prices were outrageous, but we didn't have a choice. As we sat at a small table in the corner, eating food that tasted like cardboard, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The magazine Earl was reading. It was the same page. The exact same page he'd been on the night before. In fact, when I looked closer, I could see that he hadn't turned a single page since we'd first walked in. "Jake," I whispered, nodding toward the counter. He looked, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Earl continued to move his eyes back and forth across the page, but the page never turned. His breathing was so subtle it was almost imperceptible. And now that I was really paying attention, I realized I hadn't seen him blink once since we'd returned. We finished our meal in silence and headed back to our room. I wanted to search the settlement more thoroughly. maybe find another phone or some clue about what was happening to us. But every building we approached was locked, and the windows were either painted black or covered with heavy curtains. The diner was the strangest. When I cupped my hands against the glass and peered inside, I could see tables and chairs, a counter with stools, but everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if the place had been abandoned for years. Yet the sign outside still advertised, "Home Cooking, Open Daily." As the sun began to set again, we barricaded ourselves back in room 3. Jake pushed the dresser in front of the door while I checked the bathroom for any other way out. The window above the toilet was painted shut and too small to crawl through anyway. "What if we're dead?" I said suddenly. The thought had been nagging at me all day. What if the RV crashed and we're dead? "Don't think like that," Jake said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. The knocking started again at midnight. This time it was different, softer, more plaintive, like someone crying. "Sarah?" The voice was mine, but I was sitting right there next to Jake on the bed. "Sarah, please help me. Don't listen," Jake whispered, pulling me closer. "I'm hurt," my voice continued from outside. "I can't find you. Please open the door." But underneath the pleading, I could hear something else. A wet, tearing sound like fabric being ripped, or skin. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Other voices joined in, Jake's voice, calling my name. My mother's voice, asking why I'd left her. A child's voice that I didn't recognize but that filled me with inexplicable grief. We held each other and waited for dawn. The third day was when things really began to deteriorate. Earl was gone from the trading post, but the door was unlocked. We went inside looking for food and water, but the shelves were different now. The canned goods were covered in a film of something that might have been mold, or might have been something worse. The postcards showed pictures of the settlement itself, but in the photos there were people standing in front of the buildings. Smiling people with too wide grins and eyes like black holes. In one of the postcards, I recognized myself and Jake standing in front of room 3. But we weren't smiling. Our mouths were open in silent screams, and something dark was seeping from our eyes. The vending machines were still working, but when I put in quarters, what came out weren't the snacks I'd selected. Instead, I got a can of something labeled Desert Rose, in a language I couldn't read. The liquid inside was thick and red and smelled like copper. "We have to get out of here," I said. "Whatever this place is, it's not natural." Jake agreed, but every attempt to leave led us back to the settlement. The desert seemed to shift around us, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks moving when we weren't looking directly at them. On the 4th night, we decided not to go back to the room. Instead, we hid behind the diner and watched the settlement after dark. What we saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. As soon as the sun disappeared completely, figures began emerging from the buildings. They looked human at first glance, but something was wrong with the way they moved. Too fluid, like they were floating just above the ground. Their faces were indistinct in the darkness, but their eyes reflected the starlight like an animal's. Earl was among them, but he was different now. Taller, with limbs that seemed too long for his body. He moved from building to building, checking doors, testing windows. The others spread out through the settlement in a systematic search pattern. They were looking for us. We crouched behind a dumpster, barely breathing, as one of the figures passed within a few feet of our hiding place. Up close, I could see it more clearly. It wore clothes like a person, but the skin visible at its neck and hands was wrong. Too pale with a texture like wet leather. And the smell. Rotting meat and sulfur. The search continued for hours. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten, the figures retreated back into the buildings. Earl was the last to go, pausing at the door of the trading post to look directly at our hiding place. Even from that distance, I could see him smile. "They know we're here," Jake whispered. The 5th day, we found the bones. Behind the motel, partially buried in the sand, we discovered what was left of other travelers. Dozens of skeletons, some still wearing scraps of clothing. A few had jewelry, wedding rings, watches, necklaces, personal effects that told the story of lives cut short. One skeleton was still clutching a set of car keys. The keychain was a miniature license plate that read, "Just Married." "How long do you think they've been doing this?" Jake asked, his voice hollow. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I was staring at something that made no sense. One of the skeletons was wearing a jacket I recognized. It was Jake's jacket, the red windbreaker he'd been wearing when our RV broke down. But Jake was standing right next to me, very much alive. Or was he? I turned to look at my husband, and for just a moment, I saw something else. A glimpse of bone beneath pale skin, empty sockets where his eyes should be. Then he blinked, and he was Jake again. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied, but doubt had taken root in my mind. How long had we been here? Days? Weeks? Time seemed meaningless in this place. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched Jake as he lay beside me. His breathing was regular, his face peaceful, but twice I could have sworn I saw him stop breathing entirely, his chest still for long minutes before resuming its rise and fall. And in the darkest part of the night, when sleep deprivation was making me question everything, I heard him whisper in his sleep, "She doesn't know yet." How much longer? The 6th day, I confronted him. "You're not Jake," I said as we sat outside room 3, sharing a breakfast of stale crackers and warm water. He looked at me with those familiar brown eyes, concern creasing his features. "Sarah, you're scaring me." "Of course I'm Jake. I'm your husband." "Then explain the jacket." "What jacket?" "The red windbreaker. I found it on one of the skeletons behind the motel." Jake looked down at himself. He was wearing a blue t-shirt and jeans. No jacket. "Sarah, I haven't worn a red jacket since... He frowned as if trying to remember something important. "Since when did we get here?" 5 days ago. 6 days ago. I don't know anymore." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face. "I can't remember. Everything's mixed up." Jake reached for me, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me. I don't know what you are." "I'm your husband," he repeated, but there was something desperate in his voice now. "We got married 6 months ago. The RV trip was our honeymoon. We were going to see the Grand Canyon." "Were we?" I stood up, backing away from him. "Or is that just what you want me to think?" That's when I saw them, the figures from the night before, emerging from the buildings even though the sun was still up. Earl led the procession, his 2 long limbs moving with predatory grace. "Sarah," Jake said, standing up slowly. "Sarah, run." But there was nowhere to run. The desert stretched away in all directions, empty and pitiless. And I was beginning to understand that it didn't matter anyway. We'd never really left this place. Maybe we'd never really arrived either. Earl approached us with that same blank expression he'd worn behind the counter. "Time to go, Sarah." "Go where?" "Home," he said. "To where you belong now." I looked back at Jake, and for a moment he flickered like a mirage. I saw the truth then, or thought I did. Jake had died in the RV crash. I'd died too. This place was some kind of way station, a trap for souls who couldn't let go. But as that realization crystallized, Jake grabbed my hand. His skin was warm. Real. "Fight it," he whispered. "Don't let them take you." The figures were closing in around us. I could smell the rot and sulfur growing stronger. Earl reached out with fingers that were too long, too pale. "Come along, dear. Time to rest." I closed my eyes and made a choice. Maybe Jake was real. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe we were both dead. Maybe we were both alive. But in that moment, I chose to believe in the warmth of his hand in mine. I chose to fight. We ran. The desert transformed around us as we fled. The sand shifted like liquid. The sky flickered between day and night. The figures gave chase, their movements becoming less human with each stride. I saw Earl's face elongate into something reptilian, his eyes becoming vertical slits. Behind us, the settlement began to change as well. The buildings stretched upward like taffy, windows becoming gaping mouths, doorways twisting into impossible angles. The neon sign from the gas station flickered faster and faster until it was strobing like a disco ball from hell. We reached the road, or what had been the road. Now it was a river of black sand flowing in both directions simultaneously. Jake pulled me across it, and for a moment, I felt myself sinking. The sand was up to my knees, then my waist. Something grabbed my ankle from below. "Don't look down," Jake shouted. "Don't look back. Just keep moving." I didn't look down. I didn't look back. I focused on Jake's face, on the pressure of his fingers intertwined with mine. Real or not, he was my anchor. We stumbled up the far bank of the Sand River, and suddenly we were standing next to our RV. Our beautiful, ordinary, wonderfully real Winnebago sat exactly where we'd left it, keys in the ignition. "How?" I gasped. "Does it matter?" Jake yanked open the driver's door. "Get in." The engine turned over on the first try. Jake threw it in reverse and gunned it, tires spinning in the loose dirt. In the rearview mirror, I could see the figures from the settlement standing at the edge of the Black Sand River. They weren't pursuing us anymore. Earl raised one impossibly long arm in what might have been a wave or a farewell. We drove for hours without speaking, taking turns at random, following road signs that pointed toward cities I'd never heard of. As long as we were moving away from that cursed place, I didn't care where we ended up. Finally, as the sun was setting, we saw the lights of a truck stop ahead. Real lights, harsh and commercial and beautiful. Jake pulled into the parking lot next to a dozen 18-wheelers. There were people here. Truckers walking to and from the building. Families getting out of minivans. Teenagers arguing over what snacks to buy. Normal people. Real people. We sat in the RV for a long time, just watching them. Finally, Jake spoke. "Do you think it really happened?" I didn't know how to answer that. In my pocket, I still had the motel key, a plastic diamond with the number 3 stamped on it. But when I pulled it out to show Jake, it was just an ordinary motel key. The plastic was clear, not diamond-shaped. The number was 237, not 3. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe it doesn't matter." We went into the truck stop and bought real food. Sandwiches that tasted like actual ingredients. Coffee that was too strong and slightly burnt but gloriously normal. The cashier was a teenage girl with purple hair and multiple piercings who complained about her shift ending late. She was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen. As we got back on the highway, I noticed Jake checking the rearview mirror obsessively. "What are you looking for?" "Making sure we're not being followed." I turned around to look through the back window. The road behind us was empty except for the distant glow of the truck stop. No other headlights, no dust clouds, no sign of pursuit. But as I watched, I could have sworn I saw something flicker in the darkness. A neon sign, maybe. Pink light spelling out words I couldn't quite make out. "Jake," I said, "drive faster." He did. We never talked about what happened in the Chiricahua Mountains. Not directly. Sometimes one of us would wake up from a nightmare, and the other would be there with water and quiet reassurance. Sometimes we'd be driving and see a sign for a scenic overlook or historic site, and we'd look at each other and keep driving without discussion. Our marriage survived, but it was different afterward. We held each other tighter, fought less about stupid things, made sure to say, "I love you," every morning and every night, because we'd learned something that most people never do. That the person you love can be taken away not just by death or divorce, but by forces that defy understanding. 3 years later, we got a call from the Arizona State Police. They'd found the wreckage of a Winnebago RV in a ravine about 20 miles from where we remembered breaking down. The RV matched the description of ours down to the license plate number. But that was impossible, because our RV was parked in our driveway at home. The police report stated that the vehicle appeared to have been there for years, possibly decades. The metal was rusted through, the tires had rotted away, and the interior was home to various desert animals. Most disturbing, they'd found human remains in the wreckage. 2 skeletons that appeared to be a man and a woman in their 30s. The dental records were inconclusive. I still have that motel key. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I take it out and look at it. The number is always different. Sometimes 3, sometimes 237, sometimes symbols I don't recognize, but it's always there, solid and real in my palm. Jake says I should throw it away. He's probably right, but I can't, Because as long as I have it, I know that what happened to us was real. And if it was real, then we really did escape. The alternative, that we never left that place, that this life is just another layer of the trap, is too terrible to contemplate. But sometimes when I'm driving alone and I see a hand-painted sign by the side of the road, or when the GPS acts up and shows us in locations that don't exist, I wonder. And sometimes in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of Jake's face and see something else looking back at me. Something with winter sky eyes and a smile that's just a little too wide. Those are the nights I don't sleep at all. We should have never gone to the Pangitch Lake area that weekend. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I was 42 when my life turned into something I still can't fully explain. What started as a simple RV trip to test out my new ham radio setup became a nightmare that taught me some signals should never be answered. I'd bought the Jayco Eagle from a dealer in Salt Lake City 3 weeks earlier, my first RV after years of tent camping. The dealer had thrown in some extras to sweeten the deal, including a high-end ham radio setup that the previous owner had installed. I figured it would be perfect for my hobby. I'd been a licensed amateur radio operator for 15 years, call sign K7MTH, and the idea of making contacts from remote locations excited me. Pangitch Lake seemed ideal for a shakedown cruise. Remote enough to test the radio's range, but not so isolated that I'd be completely cut off if something went wrong with the RV. The campground sat at over 8,000 feet elevation in the Dixie National Forest, surrounded by dense stands of aspen and pine. Perfect for bouncing radio signals off the ionosphere. I'd driven the winding mountain road Friday afternoon, arriving just as the sun began to sink behind the western ridges. The campground was nearly empty. Just me and maybe 3 other sites occupied in the entire loop. October in southern Utah meant most of the fair-weather campers had already headed home for the winter. After setting up and extending the radio antenna, I spent the evening making routine contacts. Nothing unusual, a few local repeaters, some distant stations bouncing signals off atmospheric layers. The radio worked beautifully, pulling in clear signals from as far away as Nevada and Colorado. It was around 11 p.m. when I first heard the broadcast. I'd been scanning the emergency frequencies out of habit, something I always did in remote areas in case someone needed help. Most emergency channels are quiet unless there's actual trouble, so when I heard a voice crackling through the static, I immediately tuned in. Day 14 of isolation. Food supplies running low. If anyone receives this transmission, we are located approximately... The signal faded into static. I adjusted the squelch and tried to lock onto the frequency more precisely. Emergency traffic always got my attention. After a moment, the voice returned. Temperatures dropping below freezing every night. Jennifer is showing signs of hypothermia. We tried to leave yesterday, but the road is completely blocked by more static. I grabbed my microphone. A station calling for emergency assistance. This is K7MTH. I copy your transmission. Please repeat your location and nature of emergency. Silence. I tried again. Emergency station. This is K7MTH monitoring. Please respond with your location. Still nothing. I waited for several minutes, but the frequency remained quiet. I noted the details in my logbook. Time, frequency, and what I'd heard. If someone was really in trouble, I'd need to contact the authorities in the morning. But something about the transmission bothered me. The voice had been clear when I first heard it, but now that I thought about it, there had been something odd about the cadence. The pauses between words felt wrong somehow, like someone reading from a script with unnatural emphasis. I shrugged it off and went to bed. Mountain rescue situations weren't uncommon in Utah's backcountry, especially this time of year when early storms could trap unprepared hikers or hunters. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Frost covered the RV's windows, and the lake was mirror still in the early light. I made coffee and fired up the radio again, checking the emergency frequencies for any follow-up transmissions. Nothing. I spent the morning hiking around the lake, enjoying the solitude and the brilliant fall colors. The aspens were at peak golden, creating a stunning contrast against the dark evergreens. By afternoon, I was back at the RV, planning to work on some contacts before dinner. That's when I heard the second broadcast. Same frequency as the night before, but the voice was different now. A woman this time, younger sounding. Day 15. Marcus left this morning to try to reach the main road. He took most of our remaining water. I don't think he's coming back. If anyone receives this, my name is Jennifer Caldwell, and I'm trapped in a research station approximately 10 miles north of Pangitch Lake. The access road is blocked by fallen trees, and our vehicle won't start. I nearly dropped the microphone. Marcus. She'd said Marcus. My name. I keyed the mic immediately. Station calling for emergency assistance. This is Marcus Thompson. Call sign K7MTH. You mentioned someone named Marcus. Please clarify your situation and exact location. The transmission cut off abruptly, as if someone had switched off a radio mid-sentence. I sat there staring at the radio, my coffee growing cold in my hands. It had to be a coincidence. Marcus was a common enough name, but the timing felt wrong. Why would an emergency broadcast cut off the moment I responded? I tried calling again several times over the next hour. No response. That evening, I drove into Pangitch Town to get better cell service and called the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. I explained what I'd heard and gave them the frequency and approximate timing of the broadcasts. We haven't received any reports of missing persons in that area, the dispatcher told me, but we'll send a deputy out to check the Forest Service roads north of the lake tomorrow morning. Can you provide more specific location information? I couldn't. The broadcasts had been too fragmented, and I hadn't been able to establish two-way communication. If you hear anything else, give us a call immediately, the dispatcher said, and thanks for reporting it. A lot of folks would just assume it was someone playing around. Sunday morning, I was monitoring the emergency frequencies when the third broadcast came through. This time the signal was much stronger, clearer. Day 16. Found Marcus's body this morning about 2 miles from the station. Looks like he fell trying to cross the creek. Broke his neck. I'm alone now, and the snow started again during the night. If anyone receives this transmission, please contact the authorities. My name is Jennifer Caldwell. I'm a graduate student from the University of Utah. Our research station is located at coordinates. The transmission dissolved into static before she could give the coordinates. But I'd heard enough. Marcus's body. She'd found Marcus's body. I was Marcus. I was sitting right there in my RV, very much alive. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the microphone. Jennifer, this is Marcus Thompson, K7MTH. I'm receiving your transmissions. Please provide your exact coordinates so I can direct rescue personnel to your location. This time, there was a response, but it wasn't what I expected. Marcus? The voice was confused, frightened. Marcus, how are you? You're dead. I found your body. You've been dead for 2 days. I'm not dead, I said, looking down at myself as if to confirm. I'm in an RV at Pangitch Lake. I've been trying to reach you since Friday night. That's impossible. Today is Tuesday. You left the station on Sunday morning. I found you Monday. You can't be. What research station? I interrupted. What kind of research are you doing? Silence stretched for long seconds. Then, atmospheric phenomena, radio propagation studies. Dr. Peterson and I have been here for 3 weeks, but he left last Thursday to get supplies. That's when the road got blocked. Give me your coordinates. I'll come find you. I don't understand what's happening. You sound exactly like Marcus, but Marcus is dead. I buried him yesterday under the cairn behind the station. The transmission ended. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Someone named Jennifer thought she was talking to someone named Marcus who had died. But I was Marcus, and I was definitely not dead. The most logical explanation was that there were 2 people named Marcus in the area, and she was confusing us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The fear in her voice had been real, and there was something about the whole situation that felt fundamentally wrong, like a radio frequency that was just slightly off tune. I decided to investigate. If there really was a research station north of the lake, and if someone was really in trouble, I had to try to help. I packed emergency supplies into my backpack: water, food, first aid kit, GPS unit, and a handheld radio. Then I locked up the RV and headed north into the forest. The first few miles were easy hiking along established trails, but as I got deeper into the backcountry, the trails became less distinct. I was following game paths and old logging roads, guided by my GPS and the general direction I thought the broadcasts might be coming from. Around noon, I found the first sign that someone else had been in the area recently. Boot prints in the soft mud beside a creek. The prints were fresh, maybe a day or two old. They led north, roughly parallel to the creek bed. I followed them. The tracks led me deeper into increasingly dense forest. The prints occasionally disappeared on rocky ground, but I always managed to pick them up again. Whoever had made them had been moving with purpose, following a specific route. After about 3 miles, I found the research station. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, a rectangular building that looked like a cross between a cabin and a laboratory. Solar panels on the roof, a tall radio antenna, and a small generator shed. A dirt road led away from the station toward the east, but it was completely blocked by several massive fallen trees. The place looked abandoned. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney, no signs of recent activity around the building. I approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Jennifer? Anyone here?" No response. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the station was equipped with sophisticated electronic equipment, computers, radio gear, atmospheric monitoring instruments, but everything was covered in dust, as if it had been abandoned for months rather than days. On a desk near the radio equipment, I found a logbook. The last entry was dated 3 weeks earlier, signed by someone named Dr. Peterson. According to the log, they'd been monitoring unusual atmospheric conditions that were affecting radio propagation in the area. But there was no sign of Jennifer, and no indication that anyone had been living here recently. As I was examining the equipment, my handheld radio crackled to life. Marcus, where are you?" I saw someone approaching the station, but when I looked again, they were gone. I keyed the radio immediately. "Jennifer, this is Marcus. I'm at the research station. Where are you?" I'm in the station. I'm looking right at the radio equipment, but you're not here." I looked around the empty room. "I'm standing next to the desk with the logbook. There's no one else here. That's impossible. I'm right here. I can see the logbook, I can see the radio, but I can't see you." A chill ran down my spine. "Jennifer, describe what you see. Describe the room." Oh God, everything's wrong. The equipment is new, but there's dust everywhere like it's been here for years. And there's blood on the floor by the door. Fresh blood. Marcus, there's so much blood." I looked at the floor where she'd indicated. Clean wooden planks, no blood anywhere. "I don't see any blood, Jennifer. The floor is clean. It's everywhere. How can you not see it? And the smell. Oh God, the smell of decay. I couldn't smell anything except the musty odor of a building that had been closed up for too long. Jennifer, I think we need to..." The transmission cut off. But this time, it didn't just stop. I heard something else first. A sound like a microphone being dropped, followed by a scream that was suddenly muffled, as if someone had clamped a hand over her mouth. Then silence. I tried calling her repeatedly, but got no response. I searched the entire station, including a small basement and storage areas. No sign that anyone had been there recently. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. But as I was preparing to leave, I found something that made my blood freeze. Behind the station, exactly where Jennifer had said it would be, was a cairn of stacked rocks. Someone had recently disturbed the soil around it, and next to the cairn was a wooden marker with words carved into it. Marcus Thompson. Died October 15th. He tried to help. Today was October 17th. According to the marker, I had died 2 days ago. I stood there staring at my own grave for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had buried a person named Marcus Thompson, and they'd done it recently. But I was Marcus Thompson, and I was very much alive. Unless I wasn't. The thought hit me like a physical blow. What if Jennifer had been telling the truth? What if Marcus Thompson, the real Marcus Thompson, had died trying to help her, and I was... Something else? I pulled out my phone to take pictures of the grave marker, but the screen showed no signal and a battery level of 0%, even though it had been fully charged that morning. My GPS unit was also dead, the screen completely black. With growing panic, I tried my handheld radio. Nothing but static on all frequencies. I ran back to where I'd left the boot prints by the creek, but they were gone. The mud showed no sign that anyone had ever walked there. Even my own prints from the hike in had vanished. The hike back to the campground took twice as long as it should have. Trails I'd followed that morning led to dead ends or looped back on themselves. The sun seemed to be moving wrong in the sky, casting shadows that pointed in impossible directions. When I finally reached the campground, my RV was exactly where I'd left it. Everything looked normal, but when I tried the radio, all I got was static. The equipment that had worked perfectly the night before was completely dead. I checked every connection, every fuse, every component. Everything was properly connected and powered, but the radio refused to function. It was as if something had sucked all the electromagnetic life out of the equipment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the grave marker, about Jennifer's voice describing things I couldn't see, about the impossibility of what was happening to me. Around 3 a.m., I heard the broadcast again. But this time, I wasn't using the radio. The voice was coming from outside the RV, drifting through the night air like something carried on the wind. Day 18, still no sign of rescue. The radio stopped working after Marcus died. I think something happened to him, something more than just falling. There are things in the forest, things that aren't quite right. I found tracks around the station this morning, but they don't look human. The prints are the right size and shape, but they don't sink into the ground properly. Like whatever made them doesn't weigh anything. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees and the surface of the lake. I keep hearing voices of people who can't be there, scientists who left years ago, visitors who died in accidents, even my own voice from conversations I haven't had yet. This place is wrong. The atmospheric research we were doing, I think we found something we weren't supposed to find. The voice was getting fainter, more distant. If anyone finds this recording, don't come looking for us. Whatever's in these mountains, it collects people somehow. Takes their voices, their experiences, their last moments. Marcus tried to help, and now he's part of it too. I can hear him sometimes, calling my name from the forest. But it's not really him. It's never really him. The voice faded to nothing, leaving only the sound of wind through the pines. I packed up and left that night, driving the mountain roads in darkness with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't stop until I reached Interstate 15, surrounded by truck stop lights and the comfortable noise of civilization. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next few weeks, I researched everything I could find about the area north of Pangitch Lake. I discovered that there had indeed been a University of Utah research station in that location, but it had been abandoned in 1987 after a graduate student named Jennifer Caldwell disappeared during a solo research project. Her body was never found. The station had been studying atmospheric anomalies that affected radio propagation, exactly what Jennifer had described. According to the research reports I found, they'd detected unusual electromagnetic phenomena that seemed to create temporal echoes in radio transmissions. Signals from the past bleeding through into the present. Dr. Peterson, the professor Jennifer had mentioned, died in 1994. But according to his final research notes, he believed they'd discovered something in those mountains that existed outside normal time and space, something that fed on human experiences and consciousness, preserving them like insects in amber. 6 months later, I returned to Pangitch Lake. I had to know if what I'd experienced was real or just some kind of stress-induced hallucination. The RV campground was exactly as I remembered it. But when I hiked north to look for the research station, I found only an empty clearing. No building, no equipment, no road. Even the cairn was gone. But as I stood in that clearing, my radio, a new one I'd bought to replace the dead equipment, crackled to life. Marcus? Marcus, is that you? I've been waiting for you to come back. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned off the radio and hiked back to my RV as quickly as I could, because I'd finally understood what had happened to me that weekend. I'd heard Jennifer's story because it was my story, too. Somewhere, in some version of events, Marcus Thompson had died trying to help her, and that death had created an echo, a temporal shadow that I'd somehow stepped into. The thing is, I'm not sure which version is real. Am I the Marcus who lived, receiving echoes of the Marcus who died? Or am I the echo of the Marcus who lived, forever trying to help someone I can never reach? I still use my ham radio. I still go camping in remote locations, but I never monitor the emergency frequencies anymore. And I stay far away from places where the mountains are too quiet and the signals bounce in directions they shouldn't. Because sometimes, late at night when atmospheric conditions are just right, I still hear Jennifer's voice calling for help. And sometimes, I hear my own voice answering her, promising that rescue is coming, that everything will be okay. But rescue never comes. It never can. Some echoes are too strong to fade, some stories too tragic to end. And sometimes when I'm alone in the wilderness with nothing but my radio for company, I wonder if the next voice I hear calling for help will be my own.